At the special couples party, the moment a man I'd never seen in my life grabbed my wife's hand and pulled her away from me as if she'd never been mine, as if I didn't exist beside her, the world didn't stop, but something inside me died. He kissed her right there, in front of everyone, and left, taking with him not only the woman I loved, but all the plans I'd ever dreamed of. The room remained full, the music continued playing, the lights didn't flicker, no one fell silent, there were no screams or scandals. The world was cruelly indifferent to the tragedy that had just unfolded within me. When I finally reached them, she let go of his hand with a forced delay, like someone who realizes they've been caught red-handed and tries, in vain, to hide the crime scene. She looked at me as if surprised, but her eyes were wet, not with guilt, but with confusion. And then she said it. She said it as if each word were a step away from everything we'd built. Here ends everything I once called us. Her voice was firm, rehearsed, perhaps repeated 1,000 times inside her head. But inside, I saw her crumble. Her gaze screamed what her mouth hid. It was the look of someone who had bet everything on something they weren't sure they truly wanted. And I, suffocated by a pain beyond words, simply walked out of there without looking back. But before I left, I still found the strength to whisper to myself, I deserve more than crumbs of respect. It's cruel how love can end in silence. How something so full of life can die without a sound. What we had wasn't perfect, but it was ours. It was real. It was intimate, made of shared laughter in the dark, of small gestures that only we understood. Of a complicity not found on every street corner. And yet, it only took an instant for everything to fall apart. An instant for me to become a stranger to the woman who was once my best friend, my lover, my life partner. For days, I tried to understand where I lost her. What I failed to do. If at some point I stopped listening, stopping seeing. I tried to find flaws in myself to justify what was unjustifiable. But there was no excuse. What happened there wasn't about me, it was about her. About the void she tried to fill with the novelty of a forbidden kiss. About the ego that screams louder than reason when routine begins to suffocate. About someone who confused freedom with emotional irresponsibility. She thought she'd found something better. That this man, this stranger with a confident posture and a bold look, was the beginning of a new chapter. And perhaps it was, but a short, shallow chapter, written in smudged pen. It didn't take long for her to realize he didn't want a future, he wanted a moment. A trophy. Proof that he could have anyone he wanted, even a committed woman. And when the glow of that impulse faded, she found herself alone. Not alone like when you're single. Alone like someone who knows they've made a mistake and can't fix it. Alone like someone who understands they've lost something they won't get back. I didn't look back. Not because it didn't hurt, but because if I had, maybe I would have forgiven. And if I had forgiven in that moment, I would have been telling myself that my worth was less than hers. That the pain she caused was a fair price for love. But I knew that no love survives disrespect. And I learned to love myself more the very moment she chose to forget me. The following days were a strange emptiness. Waking up without her presence, without her voice, without her mess in the bathroom, felt like a surreal absence. Yet, it was a clean absence. No lies, no secrets, no tension in the air. The house felt lighter, yet sadder. And little by little, something inside me began to rebuild itself. Not in a rush, but with truth. I relearned to smile at simple things. I bought plants. I listened to old songs. I rediscovered my own reflection. One day, I met someone. Someone who didn't arrive trying to erase the past, but wanting to build a present. Who looked me in the eyes and saw me whole, with all my scars. Someone who wasn't in a rush, nor playing games, nor demanding. Just presence. And for the first time in a long time, I felt chosen again. But this time, by someone who knew what they wanted. Months later, my ex came back. Not with the same arrogance as before. Not with the firm voice he used to say goodbye. She came back with her eyes downcast, her shoulders hunched, her hands restless. She said she loved me, that she regretted it. That what she did was crazy, impulsive, stupid. He said he thought about me every day. That he dreamed of my scent. That he still kept our ring. That I should never have left. And for the first time since that day, I listened to her. Without anger, without irony, without hurt. I heard every word, every apology. And in the end, calmly, I said I forgave her. But that I wouldn't go back. That forgiveness wasn't a bridge to a new beginning, it was the final point. Liberation. Because the love we had, though true, didn't survive the betrayal. Because even if I wanted to, I wouldn't know how to trust anymore. And because now, someone chose me every day, truthfully. And I chose this peace, this construction, this love without secrets. She cried. She cried with the kind of cry that comes from the soul. That doesn't try to convince anyone of anything, just escapes the body as if releasing guilt in liquid form. And in that moment, I knew she finally understood. Not the pain she caused me, because no one understands that except those who feel it, but the loss of what she destroyed. The kind of love that can't be found again. The kind of companionship that is built brick by brick over the years. And there, in that reunion without promises, she realized that I wasn't just the man who loved her. I was the man who would have stayed forever, if she had stayed too. She still tried to justify herself. He said what she had with that man was brief, empty, meaningless. That she felt used. That she regretted it the moment he turned his back without even saying goodbye. But none of that mattered anymore. Because the problem was never that man. It was the choice. The moment she let my hand slip through her fingers to take someone else's. The moment she chose an impulse over the story we'd built. A mistake that involved no blood, no screams, no scandals, but that killed love in the cruelest way, with coldness. I no longer felt anger. I felt pity. Because I'd rebuilt myself, but she still carried the weight of everything she destroyed. Time passed. Life went on. And one day, by a twist of fate or a whim of longing, I received a letter from her. Not a letter of reconciliation, nor a desperate plea for me back. It was a letter of gratitude. She wrote that the love she had for me was the truest of her life. That, if she could go back in time, she would have held my hand tighter that day. That I taught her respect, presence, and constancy. That, even unintentionally, my absence taught her more than my presence. And that she left me alone, with affection. It was a sad but beautiful letter. A kind of mature farewell. An acknowledgement of what was lost. And I cried. Not because I wanted to go back. But because I remembered how much I loved someone who once destroyed me. Today, I look back and see no resentment. I see learning. I see a man who was broken, but rebuilt. Who was betrayed, but didn't lose himself. Who chose to love himself when the other's love ended. And who now lives a love that's whole, without halves, without secrets, without fear. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still hear that phrase of hers echoing inside me, "Here ends everything I once called us." And I wonder, if she had said that with regret a second before the kiss, would it have been different? And that's where the real story begins. Welcome to the channel. Here, betrayal isn't romanticized, it's exposed. Our stories are fictional, but the feelings are real. Each storyline is a reminder of how one wrong choice can destroy true love and leave deep scars. This channel does not support, encourage, and will never justify any form of betrayal. Now get comfortable. Because what you're about to hear is strong, shocking. And it can change the way you see love. Good story. They met on an ordinary afternoon, like so many others that seem insignificant until they become the starting point of a lifetime. It was in a coffee shop near downtown, when they were both late for different appointments and ended up sharing the same table due to lack of space. A banal, almost imperceptible detail, but one that would alter the course of everything that would come after. He, with a book in his hands and tired eyes, had the air of someone observing the world silently, unhurriedly, as if trying to absorb every detail before speaking. She, on the other hand, exuded a restless energy, an easy laugh, and an impulsive way of speaking with her hands as she told any story. That combination, the calm man and the intense woman, seemed unlikely, but it found a silent balance. His name was Daniel, hers, Emily. And from that impromptu meeting, the coincidences began to multiply, as if the universe had left clues that they needed to meet. Over the following months, their relationship grew slowly, with the maturity of someone who no longer believed in easy promises, but also with the lightness of someone who still wanted to believe that love could be secure, even in such an unstable world. Daniel was an architect, methodical, analytical, someone who liked to plan the smallest details before making any decision. Emily worked in event marketing and lived a fast-paced life, constantly interacting with people, ideas, and challenges. He was captivated by her spontaneity. She felt secure in his serenity. Emily brought color to Daniel's drab days, and he was the solid ground she stood on when everything around her seemed to be spinning too fast. Their connection grew slowly, like a house built with careful attention to its foundation. Without grand vows, but with small gestures that, little by little, transformed into something greater. The two lived alone, but soon began sharing weekends. Then, entire weeks. Until sharing the same roof became a natural consequence of their relationship. They rented a small but cozy apartment on a quiet street, away from the hustle and bustle of downtown, where they could create their own routine. The decor was done piecemeal, each object carefully chosen, each corner of the house with a story. Emily brought her colorful paintings and her exaggeratedly patterned pillows. Daniel put together the bookshelf that housed his architecture books and the plants he liked to tend on Sunday mornings. The house was an exact reflection of what they built together, a balance between light laughter and deep silences. And despite their differences, there was something fundamental that united them: respect. Conversation. A genuine desire to make it work. Emily had a large, busy, noisy social circle. Daniel, more reserved, preferred get-togethers with a few friends, quiet afternoons at home. Despite this, they never imposed rigid boundaries. They learned from each other's world. She took him to events, parties, and get-togethers, and he taught her to enjoy the silence, to value calm. On days when they disagreed, they argued, but always ended up laughing at themselves. Daniel was the kind of man who preferred to listen before reacting, and Emily, even with her explosive nature, always knew when she was overreacting. They had something rare, a sense of partnership that seemed to withstand the common turbulence. Between them, there was complicity, a respect built on the little things. He knew how she liked her coffee. She knew the silences he needed when the day was heavy. The things that were unsaid but felt. This mutual attention became the cornerstone of their relationship. Little by little, they began to talk about the future. About buying an apartment, maybe moving to another city. Emily spoke of marriage subtly, unhurriedly, but with sparkling eyes. Daniel, always pragmatic, wasn't the type to get emotional easily, but he always listened attentively. He didn't promise with words, but with actions. He helped her study for her MBA exams, drove hours just to accompany her to important events, held her hand at family dinners. Emily often said, half jokingly, half seriously, that Daniel was her safe haven. That with him, everything seemed clearer, easier. He, in turn, found in her a light that brightened even the darkest days. She reminded him that life was also about allowing yourself to make mistakes, laughing out loud, and changing plans midstream. He reminded her that stability wasn't boredom, it was caring. Life continued with its ups and downs, like any long-term relationship. Responsibilities increased, time seemed to pass more quickly, and sometimes, routine tightened their bonds. But even when exhaustion took over, they made a daily choice to stay. To try. To talk late in the kitchen even when sleep was a burden. To make peace in the middle of a busy day. To look at each other tenderly even in the hardest moments. There was a foundation. A story being written slowly, with truth. And this was more than passion, it was love in its most mature form. One day, she invited him to a special couples party, hosted by a coworker. It would be an elegant affair, with live music, a full dinner, and interactive activities. Emily loved this kind of atmosphere. Daniel hesitated, as he always did when faced with larger social events, but ultimately accepted for her. He knew how important these moments were to her. And even though it wasn't her favorite setting, he was willing to go. For her, he always would be. The week was busy, like so many others, but they made a point of choosing outfits together, coordinating schedules, and laughing at the party's theme options. It was a light-hearted moment, a promise of a different night, a break from the routine they both knew so well. She seemed excited, radiant. He, restrained as always, but with the look of someone who enjoyed seeing her happy. In the days leading up to the party, there were no signs. No change in tone, no evident distance. There was the same text exchange during the day, the same impromptu dinner at night, the same discussions about series and plans. Emily was more involved with work, as was common at that time of year, and Daniel was immersed in new projects. But between them, everything seemed stable. Perhaps even too comfortable. And sometimes, when the routine becomes too constant, some restless hearts mistake peace for boredom. But he didn't see that. Not at that stage. He was there. Present. Confident that they were on the right path. Confident that love, when it's real, endures even silence. And perhaps because of that, he didn't notice the cracks that were beginning to form between the lines. Emily never stopped showing affection. She kissed him before leaving, texted him midday, laughed at the same old jokes. Daniel believed in the stability they'd built. In the strength of their relationship, in the solidity of time. There was a history between them that, to anyone's eyes, seemed unshakable. Social media showed smiling photos, trips together, affectionate comments. Friends saw them as an exemplary couple. And, indeed, that's what they seemed to be, two adults who had chosen to love truly. But there are cracks that don't make a sound. That form slowly, inside. Sometimes, an unspoken word, a misunderstood feeling, a desire too closely held. Small fractures that only reveal themselves when something comes along and shatters everything. And, at that moment, no one knew what was about to happen. Not even her. Not even him. The night of the party approached. Emily was excited, as she always was before any event. Daniel, though tired, continued his quiet, caring manner. He hurried to finish his reports, straightened his shirt, and smiled discreetly as she complained about her dress. They were together, in the same space, in the same routine, sharing the same conversations. But inside her, something was stirring. Something even she couldn't quite name. And inside him, there was only confidence. The blind certainty of someone who believes that when you give your all, there's no reason to doubt. What they didn't know, what no one in that room could have imagined, was that that night wouldn't just mark a party. It would be the beginning of the end of a story that seemed meant to last. And it all would begin with a look. With a gesture. With a choice. From that moment on, nothing would be the same. And they would both discover, in the cruelest way, that love, no matter how strong, cannot survive when respect is broken. But that was yet to come. The party was just the beginning, the trigger for something no one there could have foreseen. The room, with its warm lights and scattered laughter, seemed harmless, but amid the couples dancing and toasting, something was about to snap. Daniel, in a dark suit and serene gaze, followed Emily between the tables, proud, if a little out of place in the noisy environment. She, radiant, greeted colleagues and friends, her hair shining in the yellow light, her perfume marking her passage. He watched her fondly, admiring how well she fit into the setting. But there was something subtle, almost imperceptible, that began to change that night, a look exchanged in silence, a touch that lingered longer than it should have, an unease hidden behind smiles. Daniel noticed, but ignored it. He believed in her. He believed in everything they had built. He was not a man of empty jealousy, nor of unfounded suspicions. And it was precisely this trust that blinded him. What happened next was etched in his memory like a nightmare lived in complete lucidity. An unknown man approached, with a confidence that overflowed with arrogance. He spoke something in her ear, and before Daniel could comprehend, the gesture happened. A kiss. A public, unexpected, cutting kiss. The room seemed to fall silent. Emily stood still, unresponsive. For a few seconds, Daniel didn't understand what he was seeing. Then, the shock turned into a paralyzing emptiness. She tried to say something, but the words wouldn't come. The man simply smiled, as if winning an invisible game, and walked away, taking with him what little dignity remained in that scene. Daniel approached, stunned, and Emily, in a belated reflex, released the stranger's hand, stepping back. And that was when she spoke those words that pierced him like a blade, "Here ends everything I once called us." She said it without stuttering, without hesitation, but her eyes trembled. He stood there, voiceless, just feeling his body grow heavy, his heart shatter in silence. Then he turned and left. There was no scandal, no audience. Just the distant sound of the music playing again, as if nothing had happened. In the following days, silence became a cruel companion. No explanation, no attempt at contact. She disappeared. Daniel tried to understand, searching for meaning in memories, turning over every moment of their lives, searching for a sign, a flaw, a loophole. He found none. What remained was a jumble of unanswered questions. Until, weeks later, she reached out to him. She called late one night, asking to talk. Her voice sounded shaky, tired, like someone carrying too much weight. They met in the same cafe where it all began. Fate, capricious, brought them face to face again in the same place where they had once fallen in love. But this time, there were no smiles. Only an abyss between them. She arrived first, her eyes puffy, her face pale. When he sat down, she tried to smile, but the gesture died before it could begin. For a moment, they were silent. He waited for her to speak, but her voice seemed stuck in her throat. Until, finally, she let it out. She said she needed to tell the truth. That she couldn't bear the weight of what she'd done. That the man at the party wasn't a coincidence, nor a random stranger. He was someone from her past. Someone she thought she'd forgotten. She said that, before meeting Daniel, she'd had a turbulent relationship with this man, someone who made her believe she'd never be enough, who toyed with her feelings, and that, upon seeing him again at that party, she felt something confusing, something she couldn't explain. "I thought I needed to understand what I still felt," she said, tears falling slowly. "But the moment it all happened, I realized there was no love at all, just emptiness. And in that emptiness, I lost the best thing I'd ever had." Daniel listened silently. His chest tight. His hands trembling, gripping the edge of the table. It wasn't just about the kiss. It was about everything he believed in. About the trust destroyed. About the love undone by a moment of weakness. She continued. She said the man, after that, disappeared. That he no longer wanted contact, that he treated her coldly, as if she'd never meant anything. "I was used," she murmured, her voice breaking. "But I don't want that to sound like an excuse. I made a choice. And I lost you." He took a deep breath. He didn't answer right away. Inside him, anger mixed with pain, disbelief with sadness. "You didn't lose me because of him," he said finally. "You lost me when you decided to forget me, even for a second. When you chose to live in a moment and destroy a story." She lowered her gaze, unable to look at the man who had once loved her more than anything. The conversation continued between pauses and tears. She repeatedly asked for forgiveness, but he knew forgiveness wouldn't be a bridge, only closure. Emily tried to explain that she'd felt suffocated by the routine, that she needed to prove something to herself, but the truth was, no explanation was enough. Daniel looked at her and saw a stranger. A woman he no longer recognized. The same woman who once made him laugh until he cried now made him bleed inside with words of regret. He stood, ready to leave, but she took his hand one last time. "You'd hate me less if you knew the rest," she said, her tone barely audible. He turned, his gaze hardened, and she revealed what she'd hidden until that moment, that the man at the party had planned everything. That he knew who Daniel was. That the kiss was a provocation, a kind of personal revenge, not against her, but against Daniel himself. He stood still, trying to comprehend the absurdity. "Revenge?" he asked, confused. Emily nodded, crying. He said the man was the brother of a former girlfriend of Daniel's, someone who never accepted the end of a youthful relationship. That, upon meeting Emily again at a work event, he discovered she was married to him. And, out of pure perversity, he set up the perfect scenario to publicly humiliate Daniel. Emily, unaware of anything, let herself be drawn in. And the moment she realized it, she was already trapped in an emotional trap that destroyed everything. "I was stupid, Daniel. I was weak. I thought I was reliving something of mine, but he was just using me to get to you." Daniel sat back down, his heart pounding, his thoughts jumbled. Everything made sense now, the provocative gaze, the arrogant confidence, the way the man seemed to know his gestures, his reactions. For a moment, hatred mingled with compassion. He looked at Emily and saw how broken she was, how consumed by regret. But he also saw that none of it erased what had happened. "You could have said no," he said in a cold, controlled voice. "You could have just left. Instead, you left me there, watching me die inside." She cried, her body hunched over, her face buried in her hands. "I didn't know it would be the end," she murmured. "But it was," he replied. "It was the end the moment you chose another hand to hold." The silence stretched between them like a wall. Emily tried to move closer, but he backed away. "I don't hate you," she finally said, her voice trembling. "But I don't love you anymore either. And that's the saddest part." She watched him, her eyes brimming, as if trying to capture that moment, the last look of someone who still cared enough to say an honest goodbye. He stood, left money on the table, and left, leaving behind the smell of coffee and a story that would never return. In the days that followed, she tried sending messages, letters, emails, any form of contact. Daniel didn't respond. He wasn't seeking revenge, just peace. And peace came, but accompanied by an emptiness that took time to fill. Emily, on the other hand, sank into regret. She discovered that the man had disappeared from the country, that everything she'd experienced was calculated to destroy her, and that her life had become the ruined field of an ill-considered choice. And when she finally found the courage to look at herself, she realized she'd lost something she would never find again, the trust of someone who truly loved her. Time passed, and Daniel moved on. Not quickly, not with relief, but with a hard-won calm. He learned to forgive not for her, but for himself. Because hating her would be keeping her alive within him. Months later, upon receiving the letter she sent, with words of regret and gratitude, he cried for the last time. Not in pain, but in liberation. Their story had come to an end, and their love, though dead, still left echoes. But he knew, some stories end so others can begin. And it was with this understanding that Daniel finally allowed himself to move on. Daniel didn't seek revenge, didn't wish harm, and didn't seek answers beyond those he already had. Instead, he chose the harder and more mature path, moving on. After his last conversation with Emily, he understood that nothing could rebuild what had been destroyed. No words, tears, or gestures could restore the innocence of loving without fear, the freedom to trust with closed eyes, the warmth of Sundays shared without tension. There was no going back, and he didn't want a fresh start sustained by rubble. He decided to move house. That apartment, once the home of so many dreams, was now merely a painful reminder of what had been lost. He took with him only what was rightfully his and left behind everything that held shared memories. The sofa where they laughed, the bookshelf where they stored books, the walls that listened to their silences, everything remained, part of a history he no longer wanted to revisit. The new house was smaller, more discreet, and located in a more secluded neighborhood, surrounded by trees and silence. It was a space that represented exactly what he needed, peace. In the first few months, he felt the weight of loneliness more strongly than he ever imagined. The absence manifested itself in the most banal details, when cooking, when folding clothes, when listening to a song she liked. But over time, what hurt became just a distant echo. He didn't hate her. He just didn't feel it anymore. And perhaps that was the worst punishment for someone who hurt him hoping to remain unforgettable. Daniel wasn't frozen in the past. He was, little by little, being reborn. And it was during this period of silent reconstruction that he met someone. She didn't arrive with promises, nor with urgency. She arrived with simplicity. She was the kind of person who spoke calmly and listened attentively. They met at a book fair, during an unpretentious conversation about an old author. At first, Daniel was apprehensive. Afraid of repetition, of pain, of the surrender that comes with vulnerability. But she didn't pressure him. She gave him time, space, and, above all, truth. It was different from anything he'd ever known. With her, there were no games, no instability. Everything was simple, as it should be. And for the first time in a long time, he began to smile lightly again. To talk late into the night. To dream without fear. Meanwhile, Emily followed a very different path. The first consequence was loneliness. Not physical loneliness, but the kind that comes when you realize that, even surrounded by people, no one else sees you with the same respect. The exposed betrayal caused friends to drift away. Her sister, a confidant for so many years, couldn't hide her disappointment. Her mother, though she tried to understand, couldn't hide her sad look when the subject was brought up. Emily began to live with the weight of regret. She lost her zest for work, her energy in conversation, the sparkle in her eyes. She tried to contact the man who used her, but he never responded. The pain of being used compounded by the remorse of having thrown away the only love that truly chose her completely. She tried to rebuild her life alone. She attended therapy, wrote letters she never sent, visited places she used to go with Daniel, as if to find pieces of herself scattered throughout. Nothing worked. The truth was cruel, she hadn't just lost a man, she'd lost the admiration of everyone around her, including herself. Years later, ironically, she learned that Daniel was married again. That he was living well. That he smiled more. That he had a daughter. The news came like a blow. Not of envy, but of awareness. There, at the birth of another family, she understood that she had been forgotten. And the most painful thing wasn't being abandoned, it was knowing that the love she once received hadn't left roots in anyone but her. For Daniel, she became history. And his past had been buried with dignity. Emily, for her part, continued to live with the shadow of what she had destroyed. One random morning, she received a letter. Not a reply from Daniel, but a card from his wife, who had heard the full story. The words were cordial, firm, and said she respected the place Emily once held in the life of the man who was now her husband. The letter ended with a sentence that tore her apart: "Thank you for letting him go, even if it was selfish. Today he is truly happy." Emily read and reread that sentence dozens of times. She cried for hours. And finally, she accepted that she had made irreversible choices. Life went on. For her, more slowly. With more silences than conversations, more memories than plans. She never experienced a love like that again. She didn't even try. She knew that once lost, it can never be found again. Daniel, on the other hand, lived his second chance more wisely. He didn't become cynical or closed off. He became whole. He loved truly, but without naivete. He learned that love isn't invincible, that respect is the foundation of any story. With his new partner, he built a family based on dialogue, daily choices, and a freedom that doesn't negate loyalty. When his daughter was born, he held that little being in his arms and thought about the path he'd traveled. About everything he'd lost. About everything he'd found. And he knew, with the most serene certainty in the world, that he had won. Not because he had overcome betrayal, but because he hadn't allowed it to define his life. Today, he writes letters he never sends. He records his feelings in old notebooks, perhaps out of habit, perhaps out of catharsis. And in one of them, he once wrote, "Forgiving is not forgetting. It's remembering without pain." That was his truth. The pain passed. The memory remains. But now it no longer weighs. It only teaches. And for those of you who've followed us this far, I want to know, what did you think of this story? Comment below, share your opinion, and tell us what you felt after listening to this profound and true story. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our next exciting stories. This story clearly shows us how betrayal doesn't just destroy a relationship. It destroys respect, shatters trust, and uproots dreams. It's a choice that often has no turning back. And even if forgiveness arrives, it doesn't always build bridges. Sometimes, it simply marks the end. Because love, no matter how strong, cannot survive the absence of truth. May this story serve as a warning, a mirror, and a cure. And never forget, this channel does not support, normalize, or encourage any kind of betrayal. Here, we expose our wounds so others don't have to bleed. See you in the next story.